Hi, welcome to Bookie. To unlock more world-class bestseller, please download our app. Just search for BOOKEY at Apple Store or Google Play. You will get 7 days free trial with more features. Today we will unlock a planet of viruses, and learn more about the planet we call home, the Earth. When you hear the word virus, what image comes to mind? Perhaps you picture illness, injury, and death. Indeed, in the history of human civilization, viruses have been the cause of many destructive disasters. In fact, in 2020 as this bookie is being written, the world is threatened by a new type of coronavirus known as COVID-19. This virus has infected a countless number of people, caused tens of thousands of casualties, and huge amounts of economic losses in all countries around the world. But are you aware that there's also a good side to these viruses? Invisible to the naked eye and omnipresent on the planet, these viruses have survived for hundreds of millions of years and shaped all forms of life on Earth. In fact, through the entire history of biological evolution, no animals or plants were able to exist without these tiny but influential viruses. For example, some viruses are involved in the transformation of the Earth's atmosphere. And it is precisely because the atmosphere has been transformed that there is now an inhabitable environment for plants and animals on the Earth. Although viruses have substantially influenced humans and continue to do so, most of us don't know much about them. This book, A Planet of Viruses, will unveil the mystery behind viruses, and help you understand the relationship between viruses and human beings. The author of the book, Carl Zimmer, is a writer of popular science who teaches scientific and environmental writing at Yale University. He has written a number of prominent works on popular sciences, including evolution, the triumph of an idea, At the Water's Edge, Fish with Fingers, Whales with Legs, and How Life Came Ashore but Then Went Back to Sea, and Science Inc., Tattoos of the Science Obsessed. In 2007, he won the National Academies Communication Award, which is the highest honor in this field. On a related note, Richard Preston, the author of another book on our platform, The Hot Zone, is a big fan of Carl Zimmer. He praised A Planet of Viruses for being thoughtful, precise, and engrossing page by page, and that Zimmer has an uncanny ability to tell cool tales about nature that leave you with new thoughts and understanding, while always keeping precisely to the science. Now, let's explore A Planet of Viruses as told by Zimmer in 3 parts. First, the Earth is a planet of viruses. Second, the impact of viruses on living things. Third, the impact of viruses on human life. Let's begin with the first part. Why do we call the Earth a planet of viruses? First of all, viruses are everywhere on Earth. We may not want to believe it, but we are surrounded by evidence. For example, we know that almost everyone has had a cold, which is caused by a viral infection. In the beginning of the 20th century, a few decades after the first discovery of the existence of viruses, scientists discovered that the common cold was mainly caused by rhinoviruses. As research on viruses has progressed, scientists have gradually unveiled the mystery behind viruses. They found that viruses not only reside in humans and living things, but also exist in every corner of the Earth. From oceans to deserts, from walls of crystal caves that have been sleeping for tens of millions of years, to thousands of kilometers underneath the ice layers in the South Pole, viruses can be found everywhere. The ocean has the largest number of viruses. Every day, up to 100 billion new viruses per liter of seawater can be reproduced, and there are about 10 to the power of 31 virus particles in the ocean, almost 15 times the number of all other marine creatures. How big is this number exactly? Picture this: you probably know that the blue whale is the largest creature on Earth. A blue whale can weigh 180 tons, but the total weight of marine viruses is equivalent to the weight of 75 million blue whales. If these viruses were lined up one by one, the length of this line could go beyond 42 million light-years. How about that? It's simply beyond our imagination. Not only do the marine viruses exist in a large number, but they also contain great diversity. According to the statistics issued by zoologists, there are about 1.5 million species of animals on the planet. However, there are about 1 million types of viruses per kilogram of marine sediment. It is no exaggeration to say that the ocean is in fact a world of viruses. The ocean may seem very dangerous now that you know about all these viruses, but you don't need to worry about being infected while swimming. Because most of the viruses in the ocean are phages, they do not infect humans, animals, or plants. Their main targets are microorganisms. We will discuss phages in more detail in Part 3. The second reason why we say that the Earth is a planet of viruses is because viruses have a very long history on Earth. When scientists were studying the evolution of organisms, they found that when looking at the history of biological evolution, all organisms had traces of viral genes in their genomes. This was a clue that helped scientists study the history of viruses. To understand this, let us first examine what a virus is and how it multiplies. The structure of most viruses is very simple. They contain several genes surrounded by a protein shell. A virus needs a host cell to replicate itself. Once it finds a suitable host to attach itself to, it will inject its genetic materials and proteins into the host cell, and turn it into a factory that helps the virus replicate. Each replication process can produce thousands of viruses in just one day. As the host genome now contains traces of the virus's genetic materials, scientists are able to map the gene sequence using available data, which allows them to deduce the history of all kinds of viruses. As it turns out, viruses have existed for hundreds of millions of years. For example, human papillomavirus, or HPV for short, has a history going back at least 300 million years. HPV is the culprit that causes cervical cancer in women, and about 70% of healthy people carry it. But this virus does not cause health problems for most carriers. About 30 million women in the United States are carriers of HPV, but only 13,000 of them per year develop cervical cancer. So, how does HPV come to exist in healthy people? In order to answer this question, scientists began to reconstruct the evolutionary history of the papillomavirus. They found papillomavirus in many animals, including mammals such as rabbits and cows, as well as birds and amphibians. Each specific virus strain can only infect one or several closely related species. For example, human papillomavirus and avian papillomavirus are two different strains that can only infect their respective species. Therefore, scientists compared the genes of papillomavirus in humans with the strains of other animals, and finally constructed the evolutionary history of papillomavirus. What they found was that, as early as 300 million years ago, the ancestors of mammals, birds, amphibians, and the earliest oviparous animals, or egg-laying vertebrates on land, were already carrying papillomavirus. After that, papillomaviruses evolved alongside other organisms. After 300 million years of evolution, one strain eventually adapted to and stabilized in human bodies. In the end, about 70% of healthy people today carry human papillomavirus. That concludes the first part of this bookie. In this part, we have learned that viruses are found everywhere on Earth. From oceans to deserts, from walls of crystal caves that have been sleeping for tens of millions of years to sites thousands of kilometers underneath layers of ice in the South Pole, there's no place on the Earth that is virus-free. Moreover, viruses have a history of at least several hundred million years on the Earth. For this reason, it is not an exaggeration to say that the Earth is indeed a planet of viruses. Let's now move on to the second part. How do viruses impact the biosphere? Viruses play an essential role in biological evolution. They're the postmen of genes. Viruses can transfer genetic materials from one cell to another, and therefore have a huge impact on the biological evolution of organisms. We mentioned earlier that viruses are not only small in size but also simple in their structure. Here's how small they are. Think of a single salt particle. On one side of it, we could line up approximately 1,000 virus particles. In terms of structure, most viruses are nothing but several genes surrounded by a protein shell. We know by now that viruses must rely on host cells to replicate. After a virus infects a host cell, the host cell will be forced to synthesize the genes in the protein shell of this virus, giving birth to a large number of new viruses. Normally, during the DNA synthesis, the virus's genes and the host's genes are not combined. However, mistakes may occur during this process. That is, the virus inserts parts of its own genes into the host genome. This is how genetic materials are transferred, and the virus, this postman of genes, has thus completed one delivery. If the virus-bound host cell survives after the virus leaves the cell, then the descendant of this cell will carry the virus's genes. This would also be the case if the viruses do not immediately replicate within their host cells due to their specific mechanism of infection. As such, the host cells will survive harboring the viral genes, while passing them on to their descendants. Such is the case with HPV and other virus infections, in which the carriers do not display the symptoms associated with the illnesses. This is how viruses have served as the postman of genes in different organisms for hundreds of millions of years. We can safely say that every organism's genome contains some viral genes. But it is not until the 60s that people discovered this fact. Scientists found genes of the avian leukosis virus in a healthy chicken, which means that the ancestor of this chicken was once infected by the avian leukosis virus, but was not killed by it. As the viral genes became integrated in the chicken's genome, they were passed on to the chicken's offspring, and the viral genes have continued to be part of the chicken's genome up until today. Through further research, scientists have found that viral genes are also commonly found in the genomes of human and other animals. These genes are referred to as endogenous retroviruses by scientists. The word endogenous means that these genes are produced within the organisms. Each of us carries about 100,000 viral genes, all of which are endogenous retroviruses, accounting for 8% of the human genome. Some of these endogenous retroviruses are crucial for biological evolution. For example, there is an endogenous retrovirus in our body that produces the syncytin protein, which is essential for the formation of placenta. This knowledge led to scientists proposing a theory that our ancestors were infected by this retrovirus about 100 million years ago, which served as a springboard for the evolution of viviparous animals. It can thus be argued that the mere existence of viviparous mammals and us as human beings relied on the occurrence of this particular viral infection. Viruses not only influence the evolution of organisms, but also the ecological system of the Earth, such as the formation of the atmosphere. Everybody knows that human beings, animals, and plants cannot survive without oxygen. Oxygen is the reason for our flourishing biosphere. Oxygen mainly comes from the photosynthesis of plants and algae. A quarter of the entire world's photosynthesis comes from a type of bacteria that lives in the ocean, Synechococcus. The genome of Synechococcus contains a gene that produces a protein that can capture photons from the sunlight, and this gene comes from a virus that floats freely in the ocean. For some reason, the viral gene that enables photosynthesis is integrated in the genome of Synechococcus, allowing them to perform photosynthesis and produce a lot of oxygen. In the process, they changed the composition of the atmosphere and turned our Earth into a habitable planet. Scientists roughly estimate that 10% of the photosynthesis on Earth comes from sources that rely on viral genes. This means that for every 10 breaths you take, you owe one of them to those omnipresent viruses. Synechococcus is not a unique example. It's very common for viruses in the ocean and on land to transmit their genes to other organisms, thereby influencing our ecological system as a result. It is clear that without these viruses, the Earth would look anything like what we see today. That's all for our second part. We talked about two things. The first is the impact of viruses on biological evolution. Although they are invisible to the naked eye, viruses play an essential role in the evolution of organisms. In the process of infecting a host cell, the genes of a virus may become integrated into the host genome and passed down to their offspring. Some viruses are therefore responsible for the survival and adaptivity of organisms to the environment. Second, we talked about the impact of viruses on the Earth's ecological system. Viral genes play a crucial role in the formation of the Earth's atmosphere. Without viruses, the Earth that we know today, which is home to a vast number of species, would not exist. Today we are just sharing limited Bookie. To unlock more key insights of world-class bestseller, please download our app. Just search for BOOKEY at Apple Store or Google Play. You will get 7 days free trial with more features.